Coming up, we're back to talking about fascism. It's the final stage of the campaign, and I guess it's time for Hitler, Hitler, Hitler. I'll examine the true essence of fascism and expose how the threat of fascism doesn't come from Trump, but rather from the left and from the Democrats. And drawing on an incident from her days as a California prosecutor, I'll reveal how Kamala Harris isn't just ignorant, she's also very callous. Hey, if you're watching on Rumble or YouTube, listening on Apple, Google, or Spotify, please subscribe to my channel. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
America needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
Guys, we are in the final stretch of the 2024 election, and things are getting out of hand, as we surely knew they would. Now, we can get an idea from how they are getting out of hand to get a clue about what's really happening in this election. Let me say what I mean. If you had Republicans right about now screaming, the election is going to be stolen, the Democrats are going to cheat, if this was all over the internet, if this was the tone of rhetoric all over the place, it would actually be a bad sign for us, because it would suggest that we expect to lose. And because we expect to lose, we are trying to find ways to rationalize, to explain, to account for the apparently inevitable loss. But this is not, in fact, the tone of the GOP or of conservatives. Quite the opposite. There's a mood of optimism, of momentum, of high energy, of we are in about the right place, so we ought to be. Things are swinging our way, and we are getting the message through to the American people. I want to highlight the audacity of Trump's recent Madison Square Garden rally. The rally was huge. That alone shows chutzpah. Why? Because for a Republican to go into blue New York City, by the way, this is not a rally that was held upstate. It wasn't held on Long Island. It's held in Madison Square Garden. I mean, Midtown. And the crowd was so huge that the number of people who couldn't get in was more than double the size of the number of people who did get in, filling every seat. I just saw Jonathan Karl of ABC News, someone who I've known a little bit since my DC days. And Jonathan Karl was saying, hey, for a Republican to come into blue New York and have this kind of a crowd, he said, I've never seen anything like it, and no one's seen anything like it, which is why the Democrats have gone into a certain type of hysterical mode. Now, there's been a low-level hysteria all the way through. I can't say that the hysteria is new, but it has gone to a fever pitch. And think about it. They're basically saying that to have an event at Madison Square Garden is like the Nazi rally of 1939. Now, let's talk about the Nazi rally of 1939. There were a group of German Americans who had a rally that was a kind of pro-Nazi event, but far from it being America first. That was never there. That was America first also. No, that was actually America last. The theme of the Nazi rally was Germany first. What the German organizations were saying is that they were on the side of Hitler, who had, of course, just either mobilized against Poland or announced his intention to mobilize against Poland. And it was the beginning, of course, 1939 was the year that World War II began. Now, the MSNBC, as usual, gets the award for being the most shameless, the most irresponsible. They were actually showing intercutting clips of the Trump rally with the Nazi rally of 1939, back and forth and back and forth. And really, you have to ask yourself, what kind of a media do we have in this country? I'm going to come back to that question in a moment. But this business of Trump is a Nazi, the Republicans are Nazis. I mean, think about the implications of it. First of all, it's saying that half of the country is in the Nazi camp, or is at least sympathetic to Nazis, or is at least going to vote for a Nazi. Second of all, it is making an allegation against Trump that can be easily checked out against what Trump actually did when he was in office. What did he do that was Nazi-like? Did he shut down the press? No. Did he have a secret police that went around arresting and killing people? No. Did he arrest the leaders of the opposition party? No. So I'm thinking of the early actions that Hitler did upon seizing power. And Trump, of course, did none of this. In fact, if you want to find an echo for who has been doing these sorts of things, not all of them, but some of them, you can find that on the left and with the Democratic Party. They're the ones, for example, who have been trying to lock up Trump, the leader of the opposition party. Now, if you watch the rally, this is kind of what I find interesting, is that you get all this rhetoric from Mika Brzezinski and MSNBC all about this was a disturbing festival of hate. Now, if all you hear is Mika Brzezinski, all you hear is MSNBC, I suppose you could go, well, yeah, I guess based upon the clips I'm seeing, I'm very disturbed by what I hear. But if you watch the rally, you would be hard-pressed. First of all, just look at the people there. It was a multi-ethnic festival of blacks, of Latinos. You had Jews for Trump, people in Orthodox Jewish outfits. There was a group of Jews outside the Madison Square Garden dancing in a circle. There are, of course, Jews who have made videos basically talking about how much they enjoyed the rally. And by the way, making a kind of subtle point. I mean, obviously, there are Jews in both parties. But what the Jews were saying is that in the Republican Party, they have no bashfulness about being Jews. In other words, you can pray while you're waiting for the rally to get started. You can wear Jewish clothing. You can identify yourself explicitly as Jewish, and it's no problem. In fact, it's welcomed. And in fact, not only that, but you've got speakers invoking Judaism. You've got speakers invoking the blessing of God. You have speakers praising Israel. Whereas in the Democratic camp, the Jews there are like, well, I don't want to be too provocative. I don't want to set off the Palestinians. We got a lot of Muslims in the audience. We don't want to break up the coalition. We have to go on the down low. There's certainly not going to be any kind of open endorsements of Israel. All the talk is about the need for a ceasefire, the need for the two sides to have a two-state solution. So this is the key difference between the two parties. The Jews are welcome in the Republican Party and merely tolerated at best in the Democratic Party. Now, I was on Dennis Prager's show this morning, and Dennis was saying to me, he's like, when these people go to the Hitler, I mean, on the one hand, it's an obvious sign of desperation, right? I was looking at the betting markets this morning, Poly Market in particular, and it shows, number one, Trump's odds, which were already over 60%, have now edged up in the betting markets to like 67%. Kamala Harris is at 33. Now, this is significant mathematically. Why? Because you know why. 67% is basically 2/3. So we're now not talking about 51-49. We're saying that the betting markets are betting 2/3 to 1/3 on Trump versus Kamala Harris. And then I looked at the Poly Markets post on the swing states. And very interestingly, Trump is leading, and leading pretty decisively in some of them. Now, if you look at the full list of swing states, I believe he's close to tied or tied in Michigan, but he's leading in Georgia, he's leading in Arizona, he's even leading in some states you would not expect him to lead. And so it's kind of like, okay, I see why they're going to the Hitler card, because there's really nothing left other than, like, they can't say, let's have Kamala Harris do Rogan. She's not really intellectually capable of doing Rogan. She's capable of reciting something from memory or from a teleprompter for about 2 minutes. But to sit down for a 3-hour interview, I mean, this is a case where the battery just doesn't go that long. And they know it. I mean, this is not my view. This is the view of our own campaign. That's why they're not putting her out there. So they don't have other cards that they can play. Let's run more ads. Well, that's not going to do any good. So it's like, we got to go to Hitler. We don't have anything. We don't have anything left. And the point Dennis Prager was making to me, he's like, Dinesh, like, do you think that they believe it? And I'm like, who? He's like, well, the people who invented the charge. I mean, the people like Schumer and Pelosi, do you think that they think that Trump is Hitler? And I answered, no. I said, Dennis, listen, you probably saw the video of the Catholic event. This was the Al Smith dinner in New York. And did you notice that even though Trump made some very pungent jokes about Chuck Schumer, at one point he said that Chuck Schumer, being in a woke party, had the opportunity to be the first woman president of the United States sometime in the future. I'm sure Schumer wasn't all that amused, but on another occasion, Trump and Schumer were sort of like swapping stories. It almost reminded me a little bit of Reagan and Tip O'Neill in the old days. And the point is, nobody shoots the bull with Hitler. That's the point. Schumer doesn't really think Trump is Hitler, and neither does Pelosi, and neither do any of these people. However, I do think that there are rank and file Democrats, and I don't just mean really dumb people, I mean some educated people. And what they've been getting is a nonstop diet of propaganda from the media over the past several years. And they genuinely think Trump is like Hitler. I'm sure these people will have their blood pressure rise. They will start twitching or palpitating or be genuinely disturbed. Maybe have to pour themselves a few drinks if Trump wins, because they will be fearful, because they have been taught to be fearful that this guy is somehow going to shut down our constitutional republic. He's going to somehow put them in jail or start locking up people randomly, or he's going to go on some kind of Nazi spree. But my point is, the cynical people who have manufactured the allegation, I think, are utterly deceptive. They know better, and they're doing it because this is all that they have left. I want to make a final point about the media here, because the media are the culprits, aren't they? Who are the promulgators of these accusations, if not the media? And how do we deal with this problem of the media once and for all? How do we deal with this? How do we deal with the MSNBC problem? Debbie was asking me this morning, she's like, oh, how does MSNBC stay in business? Like, who's funding them? And the obvious answer is NBC. So NBC and the corporate structure that sustains NBC, those are the culprits. And what this means, these are the people to go after. Now, right away, you can see the left go, yeah, Dinesh, here we go. This is what Hitler would do. He'd shut down the media. He'd shut down NBC. Well, here's the question I think that has to be looked at is this. Why does the U.S. government hand over a spectrum monopoly to these three networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC? Why do they get to own this spectrum or to have the exclusive right to it when they can be cable companies like everybody else? The U.S. government owns the spectrum. It can auction off the spectrum. Obviously, CBS, ABC, and NBC can bid on the spectrum, but Elon Musk can bid on it too. Peter Thiel can bid on it too. Other people can bid on it too. And the point being that if the market sustains the value, then they can have it for a price. And if they are outbid by somebody else, that means that there's a more valuable use of the spectrum. Hey, if we want to create intellectual diversity in this country, this is a way to do it. And this is something that Trump can get accomplished. Now, obviously, it will be if Trump gets a Republican House, a Republican Senate, then there you have it. Our side needs to put these kinds of things on the agenda. They're vitally important. Very often Republicans get in power, they relax, oh, the country is saved, we can now take it easy for 4 years. No, I think Trump recognizes, and we should should as well. There's a great deal of work to be done. Making America great again is not going to happen overnight, quite honestly, in my view. It's not going to happen even in a Trump term. It's going to take a lot more than that. But this is a good way to start. Take away the monopoly of the networks, and let's have a genuine intellectual free-for-all in this country. There's a lot at stake in this upcoming election, but regardless of who's sitting in the White House, the fuse on the economy has already been lit. 4 years of a conservative presidency will not be enough to turn the tide on our $35 trillion national debt. And if the left wins, well, it's like throwing gas on a dumpster fire. You don't have much control over the election's outcome, but you can diversify your savings now by investing in gold from Birch Gold, like Debbie and I have. For millennia, gold has stood firm in the face of greedy governments, economic upheavals, and global strife. And it can help protect you now. Birch Gold, my gold company, will help you convert an IRA or 401k into an IRA in physical gold, and it won't cost you a penny out of pocket. In the past 4 years, the buying power of the US dollar has declined. The price of gold has increased 40%. Hey, is this a coincidence? I think not. Get started. Text Dinesh to 989898. Get your free information kit on gold. Trust Birch Gold, as I do, to protect your savings. Text Dinesh to 989898 today. NYPD officer Jonathan Diller's tragic and shocking story made national headlines during a traffic stop. Jonathan was shot and killed by a career criminal. He was the first line-of-duty death for the NYPD in 2 years. Throughout his 3 years of service, Jonathan made more than 70 arrests. He was awarded with excellence and meritorious police duty on several occasions. Jonathan was just 31 years old. He leaves behind a wife, Stephanie, his 1-year-old son, Ryan, and his brothers and sisters in the NYPD family. At his funeral, Stephanie called Jonathan's death devastating and senseless. She said, "My husband died a hero, but he also lived as one." Now, for this family, nothing will ever replace the loss of a husband and father. But thanks to the kindness of friends like you, the Tunnel to Towers Foundation was able to pay off the mortgage on the Diller family's home. Help heroes like Jonathan and their families. Donate $11 a month to Tunnel to Towers at T2T.org. That's T, the number 2, T.org. I want to talk about Kamala Harris's true colors as revealed in a very telling incident when she was a prosecuting attorney in California. Now, this was brought to my attention by a group called the MAHA Alliance. What's MAHA? Well, you probably heard, Make America Healthy Again. So this is a group loosely connected with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., with Nicole Shanahan. And the focus of MAHA tends to be the issue of health. Now, I do want to credit these MAHA guys with bringing a completely new issue to the table. And the issue is the lives and health of Americans. Our food is being, I won't say poisoned, but maybe that's not too outrageous a term when you consider the high corn fructose that the FDA has allowed to get into all our food, all the preservatives, all the chemicals. The health of Americans is terrible. Yes, it's true that because of medical science and advances in technology, Americans are living longer. But have you looked at Americans in the street? Just look at a photo of, let's say, Grand Central Station. And by the way, New Yorkers are generally in shape compared to people around the rest of the country. Well, let's look at a group of people in a crowd in Atlanta in today versus, let's say, 30 years ago. Huge difference. And I say the word huge is very telling here. Huge difference. And this is obviously very bad. So the MAHA people who have been talking about fixing the food system, essentially what's going on is that the FDA has been corrupted, which is to say bought off by the food industry. The food industry offers jobs to FDA commissioners when they get out. And so all these people are in the pocket of the food industry. And of course, the high corn fructose is cheaper These artificial ingredients are cheaper. They allow food to stick around on the shelves longer, and so you can, eat a can of beef even though it's been sitting on the counter sitting on the shelf for like 18 months. Hey, it's perfectly good to eat. Wow. So this is something that the Maha people have been calling attention to, but in this commercial that I'm talking about, it's not about that. It's a commercial that digs up an old video of Kamala Harris talking about prosecuting parents for the truancy of their children. In other words, the children aren't showing up to school or they're showing up late. And so she has the bright idea. Now, by the way, the idea wasn't invented by her, but what she did was she systematized it, she accelerated it, she, in a way, magnified it, and she takes in this video a certain, I'd have to call it sadistic pleasure in locking up parents because their kids don't show up for school. Now, the intention behind this, I know, is to have parents exercise some responsibility in getting their kids to school. But there are numerous cases where there are factors that cause kids not to show up to school. A kid has a medical appointment. A kid has certain problems, behavioral problems or other types of problems, and those have to be dealt with. In other words, parents have reasons and sometimes for why their kid is late or why their kid hasn't shown up to school. So the idea of just arresting the parent, charging the parent, what I find really telling is that Kamala Harris is aware that she can use her prosecutorial discretion to destroy somebody's life. And she says that. She goes, guess what? She goes, with a stroke of a pen, I'm almost quoting her here. She goes, I can have somebody arrested. And if they're arrested, their whole life changes. Suddenly they're facing the prosecutorial power of the US, of the California government. Suddenly they have to go find the money to hire an attorney, which they may or may not be able to afford. Suddenly they find that their standing in the community is challenged because they are now facing prosecution. So I have the power, is what she's saying, to wreck these people and she says, I can do it at the stroke of a pen. She goes, even later. And this is the part that is so revealing. She goes, I can even drop the charges later, but I've already ruined them. And so what she's getting at here is you see a woman, and we've looked at Kamala Harris, and in some ways you feel like you're looking at a very trivial, a person lacking gravitas, a low IQ individual. And, I saw someone on social media like, don't call her low IQ because, that's just very racist and it's very sexist. Well, her father was a professor at Stanford. Her mom was a professional. And yet somehow she ends up undergraduate going to Howard University. Wow. And was she a standout student at Howard? No, she was a mediocrity at Howard University. She goes to law school. She's a mediocrity there. She tries the bar exam. She fails. She eventually passes. So we're not talking here about a person who is academically distinguished in any way or seems even curious about any kind of intellectual issue. Have you ever heard her refer to a book, an idea, a parallel in history? Has she ever quoted someone where you go, wow, that's interesting? Never. It never happens. So, but the point I'm trying to make here is that not only is she a mediocrity, not only is she silly, not only does she have that deer in the headlights look when you ask her a basic question, by and large, the prevailing emotion on her face, as I see it, is always fear. And you can almost see the thought going through her head, how am I going to lie my way out of this one? And the question can be really simple, like, how are you different from Joe Biden? And let's look at it. She has fear because she realizes, wait, I have two answers. I can say, I'm different, or I'm not different. If I'm different, I'm going to have to distance myself from my own record and from Joe Biden. I don't really want to do that. But on the other hand, I can't say I'm not different because then I've got to take responsibility for the bad economy, for the open border, for the high gas prices. So that's where the fear comes in. And that's why she tends to flee to a statement that makes absolutely no sense. It's her way to get out of having to answer a simple question. But above and beyond this mediocrity, stupidity, evasiveness, you have this other quality that I think is also worth noting, and that is callousness indifference, and a certain kind of Schadenfreude, right? The German word means to take pleasure in the misery of other people. And generally, Schadenfreude is even a little bit innocent compared to the case we're looking at, because somebody else could be suffering. My neighbor could have cancer, and I could be like, oh, I'm happy to hear that. Well, that's bad enough. But I obviously haven't caused the cancer. So I'm merely an observer, and I'm taking a certain kind of improper delight in somebody else's suffering. But it's a whole other thing to take delight in the suffering that you have caused. And that is what you see in this video. So it's on my X feed. I posted it. I credit the Maha Alliance for putting this out. It reveals the true colors, and I'm obviously not using that phrase in terms of race. The true colors of Kamala Harris, and they are, what you see with this woman is you're getting a very unpleasant mixture of stupidity and viciousness. We are officially in that time of year where eating becomes way off balanced. Parties, holidays, family gatherings always mean more snacks, more sweets, and generally indulging in all the wrong foods. And when your eating habits get off balance, so can you. This is why I strongly recommend Balance of Nature daily supplements. This is the fruit and veggie supplements right here. They are sourced from whole fruit and vegetable ingredients. All the things you may be missing, all the things you need to make up for being off balance during this eating season. Make sure you're getting more of a variety of fruit and vegetable ingredients every step of the way with Balance of Nature. Start a trend toward better health today with my special startup offer. Whether you order online or call direct, you got to use promo code America and you'll get 35% off, plus free shipping and a money-back guarantee. Here's the number to call, 800-246-8751. Again, it's 800-246-8751. Or you can go to balanceofnature.com. When you use discount code America, you get it all, 35% off, free shipping, and a money-back guarantee. Are you feeling overwhelmed by the increasing cost of health insurance? Have you had enough of not having control over your healthcare dollars? Introducing Share Right. It's healthcare done the right way. At Share Right, you're not just a number, you're part of a caring community. Forget about paying those excessive premiums. With Share Right, you stand to save 30 to 50% compared to health insurance. So think about what you could do with all those savings. But it's more than just savings. Share Right ensures you have access to the care you deserve precisely when you need it, from routine checkups to unexpected emergencies. With Share Right, your healthcare is their top priority. Empower yourself today by taking control of your healthcare costs. Visit shareright.org/Dinesh to learn more. See how much you can save. Visit shareright.org/Dinesh. That's shareright.org/Dinesh for healthcare done the right way. Guys, I'm delighted to welcome back to the podcast our friend Chris Widener. He's an author. He's an entrepreneur. He's a personal development influencer. He's written 24 books. And the new one, The Coming American Revival, the Biblical Blueprint for Igniting a Nation's Soul. He's also, by the way, the founder of the Red Referral Network. That website is redreferralnetwork.com. The book you can get from Amazon. Chris, welcome. Thanks for joining me. You've seen the polls. You've seen the momentum. You've seen the energy of the candidates as we go now into this last 8 days of the race. What does your gut tell you about how this is going to come out?
Well, I'll tell you, thanks, first of all, for having me back on, Dinesh. Love you guys and appreciate you. And I'm excited about this election. And I'll tell you, the interesting thing about polls is they're all over the place. And then you find ones that you want to watch. I tend to watch Rasmussen. I don't know that he's the most accurate, but I like it, sort of the way he's been pointing at other polls saying this is where their inaccuracies are. But I'll tell you the thing that I typically look for is the response of people on both sides, because they're getting internal polling. And when you look at the people on CNN, MSNBC, all the folks like Axelrod and, all those people, I think they're seeing what's really happening, and that is Kamala Harris is not going to win this thing. They're backtracking. They're starting to throw her under the bus a little. They're sort of hedging towards Trump a little. That tells me they're getting stuff that isn't necessarily public, and that really encourages me. I think it's going to be too big to rig. I mean, I really do believe that. I think they may try to rig it, but it looks like everything's going in the right direction, and I think people would be shocked if he lost.
I mean, let's add a few little tidbits to that, because I think your instinct is correct. I mean, Trump, first of all, does a big rally in New York, which is not something that you would generally do if this was down to a couple of swing states. Apparently, he's planning his next rally in New Mexico. Now, think about it. That New Mexico is a blue state, not a state that Trump would normally want to be. He doesn't need New Mexico to win the election. It's almost like he's taking the battle to the other side. And the other thing is, you can't avoid noticing this. There is an element of hysteria that has crept into Kamala Harris's rhetoric. Yep. Even though she's supposed to represent the party of joy, she seems to be shrieking. Not only that, but all this, Hitler, Hitler, Hitler. I mean, you go to the Hitler card when things aren't looking that good, right?
Exactly. The other thing is, let's talk about the Madison Square Garden event, and then let's talk about Milwaukee, right? For example, Milwaukee. Why wouldn't he go to Milwaukee and do a big rally like that? Or how does the Madison Square Garden help the folks in Milwaukee? I think it sends an amazing message to the people in Milwaukee, in Atlanta, in Phoenix, in Philadelphia, because they're looking at it saying, wow, New York State might be in play. Look at this amazing event they put on. We're on the winning team. I think it inspires people in those swing cities that are going to determine the election, even though he isn't necessarily there. I think it's brilliant for him to have done that, even if New York isn't in play. I think it sends a great message.
One of the things that Debbie and I talk about is the fact that by and large with Republicans, to win an election, we usually need all of our people and then some people in the middle. Now, this may be a little bit less true of Trump because he is pulling some very unexpected people from the other side, not just white working class guys, but Latinos and blacks. And so this is perhaps somewhat less true, but by and large, Republicans have gone into elections as a unified party. Now, as you know, there are some GOP, I'll call them wavering voters. You certainly have some Christians who seem a little bit infected by the woke mindset, or at least are intimidated by it. And I think these guys are weighing whether or not to vote at all in some cases. It's almost like they feel like Pontius Pilate, I'm going to keep my hands clean by just not getting involved. I refuse to vote for the lesser evil is one of the slogans I've heard lately. Now, you have a new book, The Coming American Revival, which is about Christians in America and about Christianity. How would you talk to, if I was a wavering Christian and were to say this to you, how would you talk to me about how I should think about this election?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's really simple. First of all, we are stewards. This country was here before we got here, and it's going to be here after we leave. We have been given by God a chance to be a steward of our country. One of the ways that we're stewards is by voting in elections. It's a right that has been given to us by God, and therefore we should be stewards of it. Secondly, I would say this. I don't know if President Trump is a personally born again, faith-filled believer. I don't know if he's a Christian, but I'll tell you what I do know. He sure is a friend of Christians. And I'll tell you, if we're looking for a leader who's going to do good by Christians, whether they're Christian or not, far greater chance of Donald Trump being a friend of Christians, because he already has been and he speaks that way, as opposed to Kamala Harris, who says, you're in the wrong arena here. Somebody says Jesus is Lord. He said, I think you mean to be down the street. And of course, we've seen the Democrats a few years ago when they were trying to vote God out of the platform, probably everybody saw those videos. So I would say we're not hiring a pastor. If I was on a call committee for my local church, I wouldn't vote to bring Donald Trump in as our pastor. We're voting for president of the United States. And one of the things that person, man or woman, has to do is defend the rights of people of faith. And by far and away, President Trump is going to do that.
One of the ironies I've noted in politics, Chris, over the years is that you sometimes have a person who themselves is an exemplar of some sort, but nevertheless, in terms of leadership, they don't deliver. And you have another guy who is less of a personal exemplar, and yet, in terms of leadership, they do deliver. Let me give you an example. So, George H.W. Bush was, in fact, a bomber pilot in World War II, I believe. He was a decorated hero. Compare him to Reagan for a moment. And Reagan made war movies in World War II. Reagan was not on the battlefield. And yet, if you sent George H.W. Bush and Reagan side by side out before the military would jump to attention with Reagan. They were far more inspired by Reagan than they were by H.W. Bush, even though, in terms of personal credentials, H.W. Bush was superior. Similarly, one could make the point about Trump that maybe he's less of a devout Christian than George W. Bush. I'm now talking about the son. But on the other hand, George W. Bush gave lip service to the pro-life issue while never delivering a thing. In fact, it was considered a magnificent accomplishment if George W. Bush even alluded to the pro-life cause in his State of the Union speeches. By contrast, here you have Trump, with perhaps a more checkered past than George W. Bush, to be sure. And yet, who's the guy who puts the justices on the court that actually ends Roe v. Wade? It turns out to be Trump. So the lesson I'm drawing from this is we should actually pay less attention to the person's individual qualities and more to their leadership qualities and what they're actually getting done. Do you agree with this analysis?
Absolutely. And I think Jimmy Carter's a great example. He's taught Baptist Sunday school for, 140 years. I don't know, but not a great leader. I'll tell you, Dinesh, I read an interesting article probably 40 years ago. I was in college, and the writer of the article came out of church, and a little old lady came up to him and said, "Do you know anybody that could paint my house?" And he said, "Do you know Joe in church?" And she said, "I don't." And he said, "Oh, wonderful guy, amazing Christian. He wears Christian shirts. He comes to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, leads the youth group, blah, blah, blah." And the little old lady says, "But can he paint a house?" And I think that is I have remembered that article for 40 years, because you know what? You don't ask your plumber if he's a Christian. You want him to fix your toilet. You don't want your electrician. You don't care if your electrician's a Christian. You want to know that he can work that outlet for you. I would say the same thing with President Trump. I don't know what his personal faith is, but I'll tell you what, all these presidents promised to move the embassy to Jerusalem. Who did it? President Trump. All these presidents have told us they were pro-life. Who's the most pro-life president of our lifetime? Donald Trump. I just think the proof is in the pudding.
And we say all this, almost conceding the point, at least rhetorically, that somehow Trump falls short in terms of character. I think that if you actually make a rounded analysis of the man, none of us is without flaw, but I think one of the ironies of human personality is very often our flaws are also connected with our greatest strengths, right? General Grant might have been a guy who drank a lot and cussed a lot, but guess what? Those qualities may somehow be mysteriously tied in with his fighting spirit, his unyieldingness, his pugnacity on the battlefield, his refusal to retreat even in the face of danger. And it could be that with Trump, some of his qualities, his brashness, some say, his mean tweets. This is what is connected to the same supreme courage that he has demonstrated in weathering all the lawfare, in enduring 2 assassination attempts and forging forward. In other words, if you want somebody who is politically courageous, he's probably going to have some of the qualities and maybe even some of the vices of a typical tough guy.
Yeah, I've been telling people, I don't know if President Trump would have been great 15 years ago. I don't know if he'll be great or if he would be the right person 10 years from now. But I'll tell you what, he is probably the only guy that could have gone through the last 10 years. Dinesh, sometimes I pray for President Trump all the time. That guy gets more harassment every day by 7 a.m. than you and I do in a week and a half. I mean, it's a very special quality. And I believe God rose him up the same way he rose up Cyrus in the Bible. Cyrus was not necessarily a religious king, but he was good for the Jews. And I believe that the same thing is with President Trump. And I also have seen a toning down of his rhetoric. I've seen a lot more discussion of faith. I'll tell you, the picture from that Butler event, everybody remembers the one with his hand in the air. I think his life was changed, not in that picture, but in the picture where he was on the ground, blood coming down his face, the sun coming in through the legs of the Secret Service agent. And he was almost like he was praying. That's when his life changed. And he knows that God spared his life for a purpose. And I pray for him because I want him to have a great relationship with the Lord.
Well, there's another picture that comes to mind to me from the same event, which I think he has reflected upon. Have you seen this? It's a kind of a computer-generated photograph, but what it does is it takes Trump's head and it shows the actual turning of his head combined with the direction of the bullet.
I've seen that.
And what it really shows is that this is not a case where Trump just happened to turn away. I mean, if you saw the movie The Day of the Jackal, in that movie, the guy leans forward, de Gaulle does, to kiss a soldier, and so the assassin misses, right? Yeah. But in this case, Trump could have turned his head 7 other ways and the bullet would have gotten him. Yep. He happened to turn his head the only place it could be for the bullet to graze him. And I think Trump himself, this comes up a little bit in my conversation with him in the film, the radical improbability of that forces you to think, guess what? There might be some providential plan for me here that's bigger than me, and that there may be a destiny for me to fulfill. So I think between the picture of Trump down that you mentioned, which I agree, it's almost like he is in a genuflecting or prayerful posture, between that photo and the one I mentioned, we might have a Trump that is somewhat changed from what he was before.
Absolutely. And I believe that God is at work. I really do believe this. We are in a perilous, perilous place, standing on the edge. The average American has no clue how close we are to absolute tyranny. But I do believe that God is at work, and particularly is working in the church and in Christians, but working in the lives of people who want more and realize that even though we are very, you and I met, or we met before that, but you and I became really good friends at an event series that was pro-Trump. Trump was at all those. I am all in for Trump. But I'll tell you, the one thing that we have to understand is that this is one nation under God. And long after President Trump is gone and out of office, we still need to create that relationship with the Lord and get back to that relationship. And I think that he's making that easier for folks.
Guys, I've been talking to Chris Widener, the new book. Check it out. The Coming American Revival, the Biblical Blueprint for Igniting a Nation's Soul. Chris, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks, Dinesh. Tell Debbie hi.
Mike Lindell is such a great guy, and he has a heart of gold. Mike and MyPillow love giving back to those in need. They sent a truckload of 14,000 MyPillows to those impacted by Hurricane Helene. But even though he loves to give back, a large retail store just canceled a huge order that had already left the warehouse. And so besides giving to those in need, Mike wants to pass a whole bunch of savings directly on to you. For the first time ever, you can get a standard classic MyPillow for wholesale prices, just $14.88. It gets better. For a limited time, they're offering the entire classic collection at wholesale prices. Get queen-size MyPillows, $18.88. Upgrade to a king for just $1 more. Get the body pillows, just $29.88. Multi-use MyPillows for just $9.88. Go to MyPillow.com, use promo code Dinesh, or you can call 800-876-0227. Take advantage of wholesale pricing for the first time ever. On top of that, get free shipping on orders over $75. They've never been offered these deals this low before. Go to MyPillow.com or call 800-876-0227. Use promo code Dinesh. Get the standard MyPillow, just $14.88, the lowest price ever. There are limited quantities at this price, and once they're gone, they're gone. I've been talking about fascism today and about Hitler and the preposterous equations of Trump with Hitler. And all of this has helped me to come to a decision about what book I want to plunge into next. I've been covering books one by one, most recently Booker T. Washington's Up From Slavery, and once I finished that, I took a little bit of a break from doing my kind of end of the podcast segment on a book. But I've got a perfect choice, and it's a book I would urge you to get. In fact, it's newly out in paperback. It's by one Dinesh D'Souza. I'm kidding. It's my book. It's this one right here, The Big Lie, Exposing the Nazi Roots of the American Left. Very provocative subtitle. And the book came out a few years ago, but it couldn't be more timely. And it couldn't be more timely because this looks to be the Democrats' closing argument for the 2024 election. Don't vote for a fascist. Don't vote for the party of fascism. I even saw people saying things to the effect that grocery prices don't matter, gas prices don't matter, even foreign policy doesn't matter. What matters is we are on the verge of electing a fascist to the highest office in the land. We can't let ourselves do that. Be better, America. So all of this raises the question, and the question really here is, what do these people even mean by fascism? Well, this book is a deep dive into all this. You're going to learn a lot about fascism, and I'm not bashful to carry this discussion through and past the 2024 election, because guess what? This topic never goes away. I have seen this topic discussed off and on my entire adult life in this country. It's almost like we are always contending with some newly ascendant ghost of fascism. Hitler died in 1945. He came to power in 1933. And yet the ghost of Hitler or the ghost of Hitlerism, the ghost of Nazism, of fascism, continues to haunt our political discourse. It's a reference point for all our rhetoric. At the end of the day, the worst thing you can call someone is, you're a Nazi, you're a fascist. A lot of times when the left says that they are part of the resistance, what do they mean? Where does this term resistance come from? Well, the answer is, it comes from the French resistance. The French resistance, led by Charles de Gaulle, was the Free French who refused to accept Nazi occupation of France, who refused to collaborate with the Vichy government in Paris, which had succumbed to the Nazis, was in fact part of the Nazi regime. And so a lot of these leftists today say, we are part of the resistance. Look at Antifa. What does Antifa mean? Anti-fascist. So these are people who style themselves as the enemies of fascism and very often justify the things that they do by saying, well, these are necessary tactics because after all, we are dealing with fascists. So the book has not only not lost its timeliness, but has in many ways become more timely than ever. I sometimes think back about my corpus of work, and I have 8 documentary films, and I would say of the films, there are some that are more relevant and more timely than others, but the same is true of my books. There are some of my books, I would say out of the 15 or so books, maybe 6 or 7 of them that you could read now, and some of them were written 10 years ago or more, and yet you would get a lot out of them because the issues have not gone away. And even Illiberal Education, my first book, if you read it, it's very eye-opening. It's the first book that publicized the word political correctness. My book, The End of Racism, very timely, even though it was published, believe it or not, 1995. My book, The Enemy at Home, which was quite controversial when it came out. I was at the time at the Hoover Institution, and my book caused a stir at the Hoover Institution. In fact, it caused a very unnecessary skirmish between me and Victor Davis Hanson. He thought the book was somehow kind of anti-American. I submit that if he were to read the book today, he would agree with it 100%. What the book was basically saying is that 9/11 and the aftermath of 9/11 wasn't simply us versus them. It wasn't just the wonderful West against the horrible Muslim world, that there was a divide within the West, just as there's a divide within the Muslim world. In the Muslim world, the divide is between the radical Muslims and the traditional Muslims. And in the West, the divide is between the right and the left. And the point I was making is that the left in this country, the cultural left, is going to make allies with the radical Muslims. And therefore we, the cultural conservatives, need to make allies with the traditional Muslims. And this is what set off some of my colleagues at Hoover, Victor Davis Hanson and others, because they thought that somehow I was diluting the us versus them that came out in the aftermath of 9/11. So that's the enemy at home. And then there is my book, Stealing America, very relevant in many ways, and somewhat more, perhaps the most autobiographical book I've written, because it describes my adventures on the other side, which is to say, in a confinement center, sleeping in bunk beds with criminals, my discovery about the nature of criminal gangs, and then, of course, the political punch of that book, which is, guess what? Once we understand criminal gangs, we come to a better understanding of the left and the Democratic Party. So I ask you, even though this book came out really before all the lawfare against Trump, before the 2 assassination attempts against Trump, isn't it true that we're dealing with a gangsterization of the other side, of the left? Looking back, Debbie and I were talking about this, how my case was really the first of all of this stuff. I didn't see it that way, by the way. I saw it as a one-off. I thought, just listen, I've kind of ticked off Obama. He's sicked his attack dog, Eric Holder, on me. That's why they're going after me. But I didn't see this as an opening salvo of a procession of legal cases that would be brought against, well, Carter Page and Papadopoulos and Michael Flynn. I mean, Steve Bannon is on the verge of getting out of prison. Peter Navarro, Trump, so many of the January 6th defendants, pro-lifers. All of this has now escalated to a dramatically new level. And then, of course, there is the big lie. My publisher, Regnery, was bought out recently by another publishing house called Skyhorse. So Regnery remains in business, but it is now an imprint of Skyhorse. And the Skyhorse people decided, let's bring out, Dinesh has done The Big Lie, let's bring it out in paperback. So it's out, it's available through Amazon or Barnes & Noble. And I'm going to be doing a little bit of a close examination of this book over the next, let's say, 3 weeks. And we're really going to learn a lot about fascism, a lot about Nazism. Sometimes, by the way, we use these phrases kind of interchangeably, fascism, Nazism, but there are very important differences. Many of the early fascists, to give you just a small tidbit, were Jewish. They were very comfortable calling themselves fascists, although obviously they would not be comfortable calling themselves Nazis. Why? Because the anti-Semitism that was a defining feature of Nazism was not, I repeat, not a defining feature of fascism. So I'll begin with just the first paragraph of the book now. It's actually a new introduction that I wrote, a brief introduction, just setting the stage for the book coming out now. I say fascism never seems to go out of fashion. Isn't that true? I say by this I mean that the allegation of fascism, even Nazism, has been a staple of political discourse in the United States and in the West. The invocation of fascism and Nazism as reference points for evil and tyranny began in the immediate aftermath of World War II. Very interesting. That right after World War II, fascism became the kind of outer limit, the heart of darkness, the defining feature of evil. One might have expected, I say, that as time passed, these epithets would wear thinner and thinner. Not so. So I'm just establishing in this opening paragraph that just when you think that we have kind of gotten beyond the Hitler allegation, and by the way, if we were to conduct a global survey of the monstrous dictators of the 20th century, Hitler is toward the top, but he's not necessarily numero uno. Why? Because Stalin and Mao arguably killed more people than Hitler. And they certainly killed more of their own people than Hitler. Now, you can say, well, Hitler was responsible for World War II. Tons of people died in World War II. If you blame all of those deaths on Hitler, then perhaps Hitler would go to the top of the list in terms of the death toll caused by his regime. However, if you're looking at the number of people that were killed sort of internally by the order of the dictator, the number for Hitler is big, 6 million Jews, but there were other people other than Jews killed, let's say 10 million, 12 million people. That pales before Stalin, 25 to 30 million, according to the historian Robert Conquest, who's the authority on this issue. And then there have been scholarly studies of Mao Zedong by Halliday and by others showing that Mao's deaths exceed those of Stalin. So it's interesting, I think, that when you have Maoism and Stalinism, and they are reference points for evil, but nevertheless, for some reason, Hitler and Nazism and fascism are the accusation, very interestingly, that is made by the left. I think you can see right away why the left doesn't go immediately to the communism charge or the Maoism charge or the Stalinism charge, because it is indisputable that Maoism and Stalinism were on the left. So for this reason, they love the fascism charge and the Nazism charge, because they're trying to show, and this is the heart of the examination that we're going to do over the next few weeks, that fascism and Nazism are on the right. So that's the big question before us. I urge you to grab your copy. It would be actually kind of fun to follow this along with me so that you can listen to me interpret the text, but you can also read for yourself. The book is, I've always fancied myself in my career as a writer first and foremost, so I take great pains to try to write clearly and in an interesting, fast-moving, and yet in a way that makes sense of things, but doesn't simplify them to such a point that they lose their coherence or lose their meaning. So The Big Lie, now available in paperback. Get it, and we're going to be talking about it.
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and SalemNow.com.